book from my first year in college was entitled No More Children Here, where it followed two young boys growing up in a project center in Chicago. And it followed, their journey, the atmosphere around them, the environment in which were raised, and what they saw, what they were exposed to. Except for an outlier, when we talk about the majority of population, when you talk about kids having to grow up in less desirable situations, it could be something very minute, hidden behind a nice house and a nice car, or it could be something, very intense and very violent, and something more street related. But the fact of the matter is, we think, well, they're gonna grow up, and they'll mature quick, and they're forced to grow up quick. But in reality, they really don't grow up. But they are hardened. They are disenfranchised. They are desensitized, and that's how you produce a generation of adults that still act like children. Now there are outliers, and that's where you get the 1 out of 100 that goes down the road less traveled and is able to get outside of the cause and effect and create a new pathway. And that's how we gain insights and new pathways, when we have leaders like that. So we all love those stories of those outliers that make a difference, that come out of a situation, and they're able to make something amazing happen out of that happen. But the reality is, behind that, the other 99 just grows up into a population of basically, adults wearing diapers, still childlike, doesn't know how to use manners, doesn't know how to put family first, doesn't know how to deal with integrity, doesn't, have a code they live by, talk bad about other people, gossip about other people, but yet they don't handle their own business. And we see this every day in adults all over the world. And so, we've talked about it in earlier with this Gangsta series, how things domino. You take a famous project center that I've mentioned in a previous lesson, where regulations made it so if you lived there, got help, there was no, it was a single stream income, single parent. So you didn't see a lot of dads living around there. And then in the case of before you know it, you got that dad having a remote relationship with 3 or 4 different families, through different ladies and children. And then you see young men then rising up to, maybe protect someone stealing their grandma's TV or their mom's purse, and everything's decrepit, and there's no money around, and it's unsafe to begin with, and then you're questioning authority already, so you form your own alliances. And we've talked about this in earlier lessons, understanding the origins and formations of organizational structures, and just trying to gauge that empathy of understanding how these things develop. Now, there's a lot that could be said on this lesson. I could talk about 12-year-olds having guns. I could talk about the drug availability. I could talk about even the alcoholic abuse of young ones at an early age. There's a lot that could be said. The fact of the matter is very, very simple. Kids are forced to grow up very, very quickly. And, when this stress and anxiety, this franchisement begins as early as, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's why you see, essentially thugs at 16, just desensitized, things don't really matter. And then what happens from there is human nature is a circle, right? Your leg is naturally one leg is shorter than the other. So, whether it looks violent and street oriented, or you're behind a nice house and a nice car. Human nature, it seems like we all deal with the same thing every 9 months or every 6 months. It's the same things that always pop up in our lives. And a lot of that has to do with our mind and nurturing ourselves and developing ourselves. But it's human nature. It's one leg shorter than the other. And when we get outliers are those people who are able to break out of those cycles and create new pathways and then thus, give people inspiration that, hey, I can do that, and those are the stories that we love. But the bottom line here in this particular thing, as very closely, we're going to be bringing volume 1 of the Gangsta series to a close, is the fact that, children, make no mistake about it, are forced to grow quickly. And, but we cannot be naive in thinking that that's producing, some type of environment where we're going to have all these amazing leaders because they face all these challenges. And, when you face challenges and you learn how to overcome them, still the majority of them are just going to grow up and wear diapers as adults. And that's why you get that cycle over and over again, and then they do it to the next generation, they do it to the next generation. But the 1 out of 100, the outlier, is able to see that cause and effect, is able to see the reaping and the sowing, is able to draw themselves away from it and say, I can make a new pathway. So the biggest thing that we can take away when we're studying organizational progression or leadership development is, number 1, understanding the origins. When we talked about lemons, when we talked about Sicily, all the way back to the early lessons of this series, when you talk about understanding how things develop, it's very, very important to approach that with empathy and compassion to gain a real good understanding. And then, as we've talked about how things over time, in the eventuality of time, you can, see if something is, kind of good or bad fruit, if you will, in an organization, in one's own leadership. But, we all have a very, very common starting point, very common ground. Just might look different. Cards might be dealt different set of cards. But we're all starting at a base of empathy with one another. But we have to make judgment calls along the way, because that's, even the Bible says, the ending of something is better than the beginning of it, and I'm just, taking it, paraphrasing it my own self. But that's the beauty of the process. The beauty of the process is the journey. And kind of wrap it up with this, that, that's why happiness is fleeting. And we can have these microwave moments, Instagram pic, this and that. And but what youth and development need is a ongoing lifestyle of development. And it's not, because happiness, let's say you have a goal in mind, you achieve it, you get happy, then it's over, then you need another goal to get that satisfaction, and it's a really rough way to live. It creates a roller coaster of emotions. But when you go deeper than that and you find your level of living on joy, that's the process. It's like a famous actor making a movie and being happy with the end result or not. What's he doing for the 9 months before that if he's not enjoying the journey of that whole process up until then? And same with an athlete or any business, situation where there's long-term goals. When we're only result-oriented and happy or unhappy because of that fleeting moment, it's a really, really tough way to live, and it's a really tough way to build culture. So the key is somewhere between that origin and the end result. We've got to understand that process along the way and be able to self-analyze, self-reflect, and have an observance of how we're developing along. Because if we can hit the slow motion button and analyze it like a film session, kind of remove ourselves from ourselves and look at ourselves and look at our life, that's when we can really slow down and say, okay, all these things that have happened to me, this is forced upon me by other people's decisions, but I can only ride the coattail of excuse so long. When do I take ownership of my own self? And those who decide to take ownership, I can accept a man or a woman who decides to take ownership. And I don't look the other way when I'm investing in other leaders. I don't even care really if you got money. We'll work something out. And I'm not going to look the other way, but what I'm going to do is look at it differently. I don't care so much about your faults and failures and all that, but do you have a value system, a passion where you're not going to give up? You're going to keep fighting. You're going to keep trying to take ownership. That if you fall, you take ownership, you get back up again, and when you can get to that point of ownership